Hi, I'm Anna, and I am a co-founder of Socialroots, and we are building a platform to help scale cross-group coordination across a network of decentralized autonomous groups. You can kind of think of us as the front end of the decentralized web. So we are actively looking for protocols to integrate with. We have yet to find one that can meet our requirements, but the intent is to make the decentralized web more user-friendly, but also to meet this particular use case. Okay, so the reason why we're doing this particular thing is we started out asking the question of how do we fix our systemic social problems? And basically, what we believe and what we've learned is that there's a few different problems with scaling our across group coordination. And basically, our society has become so complex and our problems have become so interconnected that we can't actually solve them without a lot of mass scale coordination. But if you need to coordinate with people that you don't have control over, like people in another country or people in another organization that you don't have the ability to tell them what to do, then you have to have an autonomous relationship across your organizations. So this becomes a problem of how do you have a mass scale in a democratic, consensual, decentralized way? And how do you get everybody to understand the problem and align and sort of figure out where they fit without telling them what to do? And there's a few different reasons why this is hard. One of them is cultural, right? You have to know how to do conflict resolution. You have to agree on the problem. You have to agree you want to solve the problem. Some of it is process. So you have to understand how large scale networks of groups can do this. And there's processes you can learn to do that. And then what we learned at Socialroots is that this is also a technology problem. There's a piece of technology that makes this really hard. So we got funded by the National Science Foundation in 2019 to really dig into this, what does decentralized coordination mean? And basically, we did a whole bunch of research, really deep dive. We were part of the DWeb, part of the crypto people, part of the co-op movements. We talked to hundreds and hundreds of people that are doing mass organizations, mass movement work. And we learned from them what was missing, what is missing in the current technologies, cultures, and processes. And the thing I want to talk about today is intimacy gradients is one of the biggest things that are missing. So what intimacy gradients are is anytime you are in the physical world, there's a public to private gradient. So right now we're in an office space. And if you think about there's the public place, which is kind of the reception area. And if you manage to pass through that boundary, then there's this open workspace area where you might run into somebody that works there, but you might actually be a member of the public. And then if you pass through that boundary into the meeting rooms, then that's a more semi-private area. And you might actually have to have a badge, or you might actually have to schedule the room. And then if you go even further into another space, it might be a team space, only engineers are allowed in this space. And if you go there, you're not really allowed. And then people's cubicles or office is a private space, that is their space, and you are sort of entering into their space and they're allowed to kick you out, at least in theory. So if you think about any part of the physical landscape of how humans interact with each other, there is always a public to private gradient. If you think of a public street to home interior, the street itself is any car can go on it. And then you have a sidewalk, which is the city owns it, but technically the homeowner has to keep it clear. And then like the front yard, which is usually visible from the street, and people should be able to like walk up to your front door. But if someone is in your yard, you're technically allowed to tell them to leave. And then you have a porch, which is like usually something you enter like once you're like allowed to be that close to the house. And then if you pass through the boundary of the front door, then you're inside, and that is like the private area. So everything, like if you think of a campsite, if you think of a hotel lobby, if you think of um, a garden, every single space in the physical world has a public to private gradient. And so why isn't technology that we interface with built this way, right? So like, why isn't there this concept in our actual technologies? And when we looked at like social collaboration tools, we really saw that there were really two models, right? Like collaboration tools are designed and built for with the business model of selling it to an organization. So if you think of any kind of like chat tool, project management tool, any kind of point solution, it's really designed and built for one organization to use, and it's sold to one organization at a time. And any like peripheral sort of multi-stakeholder organizational thing is like sort of on the edges. It's not really like how it's built or sold. And then the other category of tools is the social media tools, which is just like an ad-based revenue model for the most part. And they're really built as a public square. So it's literally like just everything is a public square, and you can have some privacy, but only if you like become completely siloed. And there's this public private binary where it forces you to either stay in a silo where you only talk to people you know, or make everything totally public to the world and sacrifice like a lot of your boundaries, a lot of your rights, a lot of your sense of like community. That's really the only two types of ways things are built currently for collaboration. And when we look into that more deeply, really it's partly the architecture is the node is the person. So if you think about when the primary object in the database is the person, there's really two ways you can build it. It can be totally flat, like social media, or it can be a rigid hierarchy, like a dictatorship, like a corporate tool. And then we said, okay, what happens? Like, how do you add intimacy gradients into an architecture? And you have to have a concept of groups. So your primary node has to be groups. And if that happens, it completely changes the paradigm. And suddenly you have multi-level cross-boundary potential, both in the back end and in the front end. And so you have this subsetting and supersetting that can happen. And you have a lot more opportunity to not just be totally flat or totally a dictatorship. You could have like a democratic, organized system. We are building this, so we built the foundational architecture and it's like basic UI. And basically it's the ability to have an autonomous network of groups that can have fractal architecture that like has the ability to have an intimacy gradient, healthier boundaries, cross group communication. So you don't have to join each of those groups in order to talk. So you have like transcluded objects that are sort of these like consensual agreements between different autonomous groups where they can have a conversation about a topic and then like be done with it. So they don't have to always like be in each other's personal space. And so there's like a lot of different opportunities when you shift the paradigm from basically a dictatorship to like a democratic architecture. So that's basically what we built. This is the kind of the backend visual. And then the next question you would ask is like, great, like how does one explain to a user this arrangement? Because it's so totally different than how almost all software is built. And I can tell you it is not trivial. So we built an initial UI on top of the platform, but like we are totally happy to let other people build a UI on top of our backend that they want to build. And basically like we kind of got as far as we got with the funding that we had, but, and like we're hoping that we can continue. But one of the biggest challenges was like context. So like in a system, and we kind of intentionally made it look like Slack because it's familiar, but right now you're in a subgroup. And we literally spent like 6 months of UX work to figure out how to get users to understand that they went into a subgroup and then they can like come back out. And I'm wondering if anybody can guess how you would get back out of the subgroup, if you can.
Under the header of the L1.
Yeah.
So do you have the same like L0, L1? Is that what you call them? Because that's what we call them at Microsoft.
No, no, we don't.
What do you call the thing to the furthest?
So that's the primary nav.
Primary nav.
Yeah, okay. And those are the groups. They're all autonomous groups. And then within a group, which you're in the socials community group right now, and then we are in the subgroup called New User Orientation.
So the primary nav is like a top list. You have a top panel. Whatever's after the primary nav.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
it's so tricky.
It's so hard, but like. Yeah.
It's the least bad way of organizing it. I think it works.
I mean, we try to.
Can you relay this?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. Yeah. So basically, what we're saying is the way you are structured is that the primary nav is on the far left. So you have groups, and then right now we are in the subgroup of a group. And I was asking, how do you get back? And there's like a little back button on the top. And someone was saying, like, this is the least worst, like the least bad way of doing it. Like, there's not like great. I mean, it's true. Like it was like impossible to find examples because no one's really done exactly something like this, and we like couldn't use existing models, so we had to like literally trial and error, and it took months and months and months until we could get consistently people to understand how to like go up and go down the nav in this paradigm. Yeah. Yeah. So somebody in the audience saying that this is a pattern that they landed on as well, which is great and validating. And this is kind of almost my last slide. I'll be like the shorter presentation today. But basically, the biggest UI and UX challenge that we have is how do you get people to think about context? Because right now, people are either like in an organization, or they're kind of always in the same environment where they're talking to their peers or colleagues in a chat room or whatever, or they're like in social media where they're kind of yelling at everyone like a guy with a bullhorn on the street. And it's like crazy to me that that's been normalized, because if you see that in like real life, you think that they were insane. But like it's totally normal for us to go online and literally like scream every thought we have into the whole world in a completely public setting. And the fact that we've been trained to like give up all of our like healthy communication boundaries because there are no alternatives is wild. So like, how do we help people learn, like, okay, you're talking from a space, so I'm talking as Anna from the Wicked Co-op, and I'm talking into a space, so I'm talking to the Wicked Co-op group, the socialist community, and like the accounting subgroup of the Wicked Co-op group, right? So I'm talking into like spaces. And this kind of like, how do I explain to people that you are creating boundaries? You're letting people into your conversation and you can choose who to add. It's a totally different mindset, and it's really been a little bit of like a UX shift of how people think about communicating online. So that is that is kind of the question I will leave you with in terms of like thinking about this problem space.
The thing that came closer to my mental model when I saw you explaining that is, if I was emailing a bunch of email lists, is that comparable, or am I missing something here?
Yeah, so the thing that people use when they're working in this way is email lists or community portals or chats. And it is like we integrate with email, particularly because of this. Like people effectively to do this kind of like it's a non-real time work, and it's like it's like the closest thing people think about is marketing, but it's not quite marketing. So yeah, we did actually model a lot of our UI after email because that was the closest analog.
Closest open like possible organization to separate people in many different subgroups, I guess, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But not within the context of one organization. Yeah. Any other questions? So the question is, can you be in multiple subgroups, and also can you relay messages from multiple subgroups to multiple subgroups, right? Yeah, so this is a node. So this is a transcoded object that appears the same way in any number of groups. So you can be in any number of groups and subgroups, or even networks of groups. So there's like 3 levels. You have to have 3 levels to have effective self-organization at scale. And if you want this message to go to all 10 subgroups, you would just add all 10 subgroups. Whether, and like maybe you're not even in one of them, maybe like one of them has an agreement with another group that they're allowed to talk to each other. So you don't even necessarily have to be in all of the groups to have a conversation. Great question. So the question is, what does it mean to message from a group versus as an individual? This was a really big decision point that we spent a lot of time talking about, and we landed on you cannot, on this particular iteration of the platform, message as an individual at all. So we force you to pick a hat. I am talking as Anna from Wicked Co-op, or I'm talking as Anna from Social Roots, or I am talking as Anna from DWeb. And there's 2 things that happens when you do that. One is you have an understanding that this is a conversation that you're starting. This is not you talking to the world. Like, you have started a group conversation. And the second thing is people really change their behavior based on the context of how they're talking. And it really reduces a lot of the problematic, toxic kind of behavior patterns that we're used to in social media, because when you're part of a group, there are consequences to your behavior because people know who you are, and people care a lot more about their reputation in the group context. So it definitely like reduces the need for moderation, especially because if you're like a problematic actor, the group will kick you out. So you don't need this like constant moderation of like complete strangers all the time, because they're not just like funneling into your living room all the time. You don't need a bouncer, because like you have a community vetting process. And the other thing that happens when you have a group-centric paradigm is everything is curated for you. So like when you start, you don't start at 0. If you join my group, you have all the benefits of all the curation I've already done. You already have all of my connections I made from that group. You already have all the conversations that have been had. You already have all the context of all the other people in that group and what they're doing and how they're subsetting, what subgroups they're in. So it like reduces by an order of magnitude the amount of work you have to do to create that network map of like, you know, you don't need to like create followers or follow people. You can like literally just join and then immediately see the network map. But that also means like you know, at least in this iteration, you don't actually get to just be a person. You always have to like have a context.
You know, I'm actually provoking Johannes here because previously in the Zoom chat he was like really excited about the intimacy gradients that you were presenting and relating that with the open social web conversation, and like saying that there is some exercise around that in the open social web. And I'm provoking him here, but I want to just say that there is this conversation about how much better would the open social web be if we were not reliant on big platforms being the central hub of like how people interact, to what you were saying around smaller groups, or like when you are presenting yourself as part of a group, a community that know you and that you'll probably like, hey, I saw that you said that and it's not nice. Even though if it's something that it's not only part of your group, but as you said, if a message that you said that you send goes out in the world, like, right, because of this protocol and many connections in the nature of the federation, like everything that I say in this community can go out in the world because other people follow me. So it's very interesting that the conversation that came right before you have some interesting parallels. Um, but yeah, I think that there is a lot of conversations to be had also in that direction, where there's a lot of energy in the Fediverse, for example, right now to implement that sort of uh, almost like a design pattern, right? It's like and that's kind of like one of the things that I am as organizer am very excited about is like to start going into that direction to identify these patterns that can be reused. Like Social Roots just did a lot of research in that direction. How can we re-implement that in other spaces?
Yeah, so the question is there an API or like how do we interoperate with other platforms and protocols? Um, we are trying to find a protocol to integrate with. Right now, none of them can support cross-group communication. They're all built for individuals. And some of them are closed. ActivityPub is closed, but it would require a good amount of work for even that. So I'm hoping that, you know, this can be something people rally around and fund and support, and yeah, the design patterns too. Like there's so many questions here. Like we just scratched the surface of the complexity. Yeah, I'm gonna summarize that really poorly. And basically the experience of like using chat groups on Signal, where people are able to like have conversations where they'll like create a new group every time a person leaves or a person is sick or there's like a new topic or they forget they had a group. So like the proliferation of endless groups problem. And then I don't know if I can feel it. And the hierarchy of groups. Yeah. 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 The hierarchy of groups. Yes. Okay. So this is a really like both of them are really good points. I think that you're right. Anytime you have group conversations, it gets like really tricky, and especially because we're not used to that boundary. There tends to be like a overemphasis on like curating the list. Like when people think about curating a list of people, it becomes like overly fine-tuned. And one way that kind of like you were alluding to that we deal with that is a group of group concept. And so basically what we learned is you have to have a fractal system that has at least 3 levels of self-organization. So like in this value creation structure diagram, you see there's like subgroups within a network of groups within a network of groups. And that is actually a lot simpler to experience than to visualize, because we're actually all used to thinking about it that way when we're actually like in practice. So like, you know, some of this is like we're used to things like chats having sub channels or whatever. But some of it is like the ability, like that's one of the innovations of what we've done, is the ability to have groups of groups changes how scalable you can still have healthy boundaries. So like, it's kind of like, I won't kind of do the whole dissertation right here, but like basically, yes, you start to have both potential hierarchies between groups, but you can also have just relationships. And then you can start have permission structures and agreements across a network of groups. It can make it so that no one person has to be in charge, and no one person can delete everything, and no one person has to be there for that thing to function.
Hey, if I may chime in here. So first of all, I think this is absolutely marvelous. This is you should publish this much more broadly. That's the first comment. Can you hear me? Actually, I got a funny message here. Second, if you look, like we're communicating so much and interacting with people so much on social media, but have you ever thought of what these tools are actually built for? Why do they have the exact features that they have? And I went through the analysis and compared it to what particular use cases would actually need. And the answer is there's only one reason why they have the features that they have, and it is to show as many ads as possible. Otherwise, we would have a completely different feature set. So whenever we start with social media as a point of departure, we are starting with advertising as the point of departure. If we don't want to start with advertising, we need to start somewhere else. And finally, my comment is that the gradient is really a good example, because it's a good concept, because it's gradual. It's a floating point number. It's not a Boolean. In the real world, we don't have hard groups where people are in and out, almost never. If you think like my group of friends, there's maybe 5 hardcore friends, and then there's a bunch of girlfriends hang around, and some other people who sometimes show up. All the groups are fuzzy in the real world. If you were trying to create a hard boundary around it, the group would collapse. And the same thing is true about privacy. We don't do privacy that is hard and fast. Instead, we meet at a meeting like, you are there in person and it's public, people speak up and it is public within that group, but then you see your friend and you whisper over him over the shoulder, and while the next guy might overhear it, it's really not public anymore. It's this kind of fuzzy, private, semi-private kind of thing. And we have none of these concepts in the electronic universe, and we need to somehow figure out how to build them. And it starts with a good mental model, and Gideon is a great model. It's not Boolean, it's floating point.
We found that 3 levels of permissions at every level of organization enables you to have a little bit of that, because some people are going to be just there reading and they don't have the right to like yell or talk at everyone, and some people have the rights to kick people out, and you have to have at least 3 levels of permission at every level to have the kind of flexibility you need for democratic gradients of permissions. And then that was just from what we learned. All right.
Wow, this is so exciting.